This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Dissler, here to kick things off for this week's episode. Today, Aneesh Sohoni, CEO of Teach for America, joins us to talk all about Teach for America's impact in the classroom and beyond, and why teaching is a compelling opportunity for Gen Z college graduates. Then, on a special edition of the Research Minute, Adam Tyner shares findings from Who's on Board? School boards and political representation in an age of conflict. Fordham's brand new report surveying school board members across the country. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And now, please join me in welcoming today's special guest, Aneesh Sohoni. Aneesh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, Aneesh is the CEO of Teach for America. Also joining me, as always, the CEO of, well, you tell me, David Griffith.
Absolutely nothing, I think is what you were trying to say. But thank you. Thank you as always for.
I mean, I was about to say maybe of your household, but I don't think that's true. So co-CEO,
associate parent. Yeah.
Welcome, David. Well, Aneesh, we're so excited to have you on the show. Excited to have you in this new role at Teach for America. You know, I sometimes tell people I literally caught myself thinking that I did Teach for America because my wife did it. So many of my very good friends did it that I start to think that I did it myself. And I have to remind myself, no, that wasn't me. But boy, it sounds hard. And of course, a lot of the experiences I'm aware of are from way back in the day, in the early days of Teach for America. And now y'all have been at this for over 30 years, which is amazing. So let's talk about Teach for America today. Maybe we'll do a little history as well. Let's do that on Ed Reform Update. All right, Aneesh, first of all, just tell the audience a little bit about your background. What have you been doing in Ed Reform before you came to this new role?
Yeah, well, Michael, similar to you, I'm also married to a TFA alum, but I'm also a TFA alum myself. And so I started my journey with Teach for America as a core member in Minneapolis. I remember teaching high school English to a predominantly East African refugee population. And, I joined the core because I met this recruiter where I went to college at the University of Minnesota. And this recruiter made this great pitch on how I could connect my own family's journey back into the classroom. My parents sort of made every choice they could was focused on how could my sister and I get access to a great education. As I came into the classroom, I saw the brilliance of my students, and I saw how hard the experiences they were having were, or their families were having, oftentimes challenges that were created by adults. And so when I was through my second year of teaching and asking myself, where do I go next? I made a choice to defer my dream of law school forever and stay focused on education. So after my teaching experience, I had the opportunity to go work for the Tennessee State Department of Education. This was back in 2011 when one of our alums, Kevin Huffman, was named Commissioner of Education. And Tennessee had won over $500 million through Race to the Top at the time and was thinking about big, bold reforms and initiatives. And I had the opportunity to work with 25, 30 other Teach for America alumni at the Department of Education to pursue this big goal that Kevin had set out for us for Tennessee to be the fastest improving state in the nation on the nation's report card. And within 4 years, we achieved that goal. Tennessee was the fastest improving state. And what I really took away from that experience was that this idea of Teach for America was not just an individual pursuit of leadership, but really the power of a collective group of leaders working together towards shared purpose. And so I started to think about Teach for America much more broadly than even I had when I had joined the core myself. After that experience, I moved to Chicago to be closer to my wife's family and took a job at TNTP, another organization that had sort of spun out, or at least the idea had spun out from Teach for America. And I supported two school systems, one in Camden, New Jersey, and the other in Boston, Massachusetts. And it just so happened that the superintendents of those school systems were Teach for America alumni as well. And so started to now realize that the impact was everywhere and our alumni were in critical leadership positions. And so when the opportunity came about to be the executive director of Teach for America in Greater Chicago and Northwest Indiana, I jumped on it because I knew how important leadership and talent was in charge of driving impact in our region for 6 years, and then went to another nonprofit as the CEO of 1 Million Degrees, where I had an opportunity to work with community colleges and their students to help really deliver on their potential in terms of economic opportunity for all students who attend community colleges in Chicago and across the country. But when the opportunity came about to come back to TFA in 2025, it was probably the only job I would have left for, but certainly the one sort of job that I thought would be so critical to the work ahead. You look back across the last 35 years, and I think, as you mentioned at the top, leadership is infused throughout the ecosystem. And I think the challenges we face today are challenges of leadership. That's why I wanted to come back.
All right. Well, that's great. And really nice depiction, like you say, of the impact Teach for America has had all these years. There is no doubt that Teach for America alumni played critical roles. I mean, I think back in the 90s, the start of the charter school movement, of course, the KIPP guys, but so many others that flooded into great charter schools, eventually charter networks, and then, into the 2000s and 2010s, more and more into leadership positions like you at state departments of ed, at big city school districts all over the place. Now, I won't make you respond to this because it's a little touchy, but I would say that there was a time in the late 2010s into 2020 when some of us on the right, center right, were getting nervous because we could hear these stories about Teach for America Corps members coming in that, like other college graduates at the time, were just coming from a pretty far left perspective and started pushing back against some of the education reforms that they were a part of, helping to unionize charter schools, let's say, or pushing back on the idea that all kids can achieve at high levels, that was somehow a racist idea, that the answer to the achievement gap was to blame the tests rather than to work to narrow achievement gaps. My sense is, that sort of, whatever you want to call that, the social justice movement kind of peaked in 2020. And since then, as a country as a whole, it feels like there's more urgency again about old school ed reform. Like, oh my God, we have this huge amount of learning loss. We still have this enormous achievement gap. In fact, the gap's grown between the top and the bottom. And we need to get back to the hard work of closing those gaps. And maybe some of the other stuff is starting to recede. Okay, that's me editorializing. Again, you can weigh in if you want, but you don't have to. But I guess the question now is, as you have gotten to know kind of how things are going in 2025, what are we hearing from these new teachers coming in? I mean, do they have that same commitment to sort of helping all kids get opportunity because they basically buy that there is opportunity in America? Or I don't know, is there still this sort of push and pull around whether schools can even make a difference?
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time on college campuses learning more about what's really motivating the current generation as they think about early career choices. And three big ideas stick out for what they're looking for. One is the sense of purpose, the ability to have an actual impact in a community and to know they're having that impact, to know that they're part of helping improve third grade reading scores, because we know that third grade reading and literacy rates really matter for a student's future ability to continue on in their education and live a fulfilling life. And so we're seeing that sense of purpose. We're also seeing this generation really seek community. This generation is aware of all the challenges of the smartphone generation, social media, and they're sort of asking, how do we do something different, right? How do we not get stuck looking at our phones, pursuing individual ideas, but how do we be part of something bigger than ourselves? And so we're starting to hear this idea of community again. And then third, they care about their well-being in all regards, right? They care about their financial well-being. They care about understanding what career opportunities they might have in the future and how their first job might impact what future career opportunities they can have as well. And this is particularly acute in 2025. I'm sure you've been tracking this, but when you look at the unemployment rate in the labor market, you see that for the first time in 30 years, the unemployment rate for 22 to 27-year-olds is higher than the average unemployment rate. And so they're asking these questions of when we face economic disruption, technological disruption, political disruption, what does it mean to have a first job that provides all those things? And this is where I actually think at Teach for America, we have a really compelling case to make, right? Let me tell you what's hard. What's hard is the financial package, right? What it means to be an educator compared to their alternatives in the private sector. But I actually think we can win at all the other areas. The opportunity to have an impact, to be part of a community, and to be a part of something bigger than yourselves. There is no better experience than teaching to form leadership opportunities. I think about my own experience of being in the classroom, being responsible for 30 other students, working with them to co-create goals, and then being accountable to helping them achieve their goals. And so we really think about this as the foremost leadership opportunity for this next generation as well.
Yeah, no, and I think that metaphor, there was a book, right? One of the alumni of Teaching as Leading, or Leading as Teaching. I don't know. It was something
Teaching as
about
leadership.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yes, and it makes sense. There's a huge amount of leadership. It's interesting, some people though think of teaching as being a very solitary profession because you close that door, and at least for big chunks of the day, you don't necessarily get to interact with other adults. So when you think about the community piece, what are you doing to make sure people have a chance to form bonds with other Teach for America core members?
Yeah, I think the best examples of this are happening region by region where we work, where core members are coming together, let's say on a Saturday, to deepen their own professional development around what it means to be an effective educator. Sometimes it's doing visits together to various landmarks or institutions in the community where they're teaching to better understand the history of that city and that community as they work with students as well. So I think there's a lot we do to sort of immerse ourselves as a community to support one another. You see a lot of our network choosing to spend their free time and their personal time together, right? Thinking about what it means to support one another as educators, but also just as individuals in society. And then you see some of our regions doing incredible things. One of the hardest things about being a teacher is the timing of when you get hired. And so one of our regions in New York, for example, brought our network together in person earlier in the year, back in February, to support them, not just in getting to know one another, right? When you have another offer in the private sector, you have a very concrete job offer. When you get an offer from Teach for America, there's a second offer that comes, which is where are you going to actually teach? And so the ability to bring employers and schools to our core members earlier in the process is another way in which we've been working to build community as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And look, this idea that Teach for America can be very compelling right now as these other opportunities dry up. I wrote about this a few months ago that, maybe a silver lining of some of this job market, which maybe is about AI, we think, we're not totally sure, right, is that it's like a recession in that when recessions happen, historically, that's been good for the teaching profession because we've been able to get higher quality people into the classroom. Again, it feels, kind of like a downer, but there is this upside, right, is that we can compete even with the not great salaries. By the way, Aneesh, we've been talking on this show for weeks and months now about how frustrating it is that we have, in many cases, put more money into the schools, but it always seems to evaporate before it ends up in higher teacher salaries, especially for the new teachers. They keep choosing to spend that money on something else. And I can see that would be something very frustrating for you. David, any questions on your mind?
Yeah, I guess my biggest question is just where do you feel like the organization goes from here? It's always been a compelling and interesting model, right? And the sort of value proposition is pretty obvious, right? We're getting America's best and brightest into classrooms, right? And then we're getting them into education policy. But there are challenges with the model, right? Like the pushback has always been like these folks aren't necessarily from the community, or these folks don't stay as long as they should be staying, right? And so I guess I'm just curious to know like what is it that you are hoping to accomplish kind of in the next 5 years to kind of either address those critiques or some other critique that I haven't mentioned, right? Like where do you feel like the organization needs to keep growing and pushing itself?
Yeah, and before I answer that, David, Michael, let me go back to one thing you said, because I think you're right, right? There's other economic factors, labor market will always impact sort of do we see more or less interest in things like Teach for America. But what I will tell you is we've been seeing interest rising even before the latest round of unemployment data coming out. And I think it really is because this generation is hungry for the type of impact that we're able to provide. So I think both things are driving sort of the motivations behind why college students are choosing this pathway, which I think has a lot of opportunity and implications for things like national service in our country as well. But David, to get to your question, look, I think the biggest challenge we face right now in education is what I've been calling the belief gap. Too many people don't think the problem is solvable because they're seeing the headlines of the nation's report card and NAEP scores. We're seeing twice as many families opting out of public schools and moving to non-public school alternatives recently. We've been talking a lot about sort of technology and political disruption, et cetera. Like too many people just don't believe this is solvable. And I start here to say, when I've been out and traveling in my first 6 months in this job, I actually see a lot of reason to be hopeful and to believe. A lot of things you all have been reporting on, whether it's the progress we've seen in Mississippi around what we know works around the science of reading, or the sustained progress we've seen in Washington, D.C. for nearly 2 decades now, or more emergent signs of progress like in places like Houston. We know what works. We also know what doesn't work. And so I think the question for us as a sector is how do we get some more wins on the board? How do we have more communities actually demonstrating tangible progress so people start to generate belief? How do we show and demonstrate what ideas really matter to get education back on the agenda in our cities and in our states? And how do we ensure that AI, the train has left the station? How do we ensure that it is actually a force of good for the future of learning for students as well? And so I'll talk about Teach for America, but I think that context matters because I think Teach for America exists to support the context and the outcomes for students in which we live. I think we have to focus on sort of 2 fundamental things. First is we need to double down on our unique role. Our unique role in all of this is to bring in incredible leaders. Leadership is everywhere, and we need the top students from all across the country where we're focusing on college campuses in particular to say yes to Teach for America. Second, we are thinking deeply about early engagement opportunities for our talent pipeline. We have the Ignite Tutoring Fellowship, which of course is great for students, right? Being able to learn in a personalized way in small learning communities. And what we're seeing is many of our Ignite fellows are choosing to apply to Teach for America and are saying this opportunity I had as, let's say, a sophomore or a junior in college, many of them see it as akin to an internship in the private sector, is giving them exposure to what it could mean to be a core member at Teach for America. And so we need to continue to deepen those early engagement opportunities so we win the hearts and minds of the next generation. And we need to get our alums into the right seats in the system. Research is very clear. Teachers matter, but so do principals. We know systems leadership matters because the vision and direction a systems leader sets, like the experience I had with Kevin in Tennessee, for example, really starts to shape the direction in which classrooms and schools can operate. And so continuing to get more of our alums into those roles really matter. And then I think the opportunities for us moving forward are twofold. One is to make sure we continue to lift up from our individual pursuits, right? It can be very easy to put our head down and say, this is the thing I'm doing. I'm a principal. I'm going to get this done. Where we see the best and most fastest improving progress is when our alums are coming together and having dialogue and debates around how do we actually achieve a shared purpose, right? In Philadelphia, for example, our executive director there is bringing together our alums from the classroom, from principal positions, and nonprofits together to say, how do we drive literacy rates in 3 wards in Philadelphia that have historically had the largest opportunity gaps? How do we start to really come together to form a coalition around literacy akin to what we saw in Mississippi? And so I think making sure we're driving that collective action matters. And then lastly, this generation expects us to have a point of view on how AI will enhance the future of learning. They expect it because they expect career development right early on for them to have a point of view on that. And they also expect it because they're worried. They're worried that AI may actually take us in the wrong direction around student learning. We may actually decrease the cognitive load on students. And so making sure that educators are at the forefront of shaping how these tools can actually work for students is, I think, a unique place where we have an opportunity to play as well.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear you say that, Aneesh, about AI. It is a tough one. And of course, we do need to take a position. I mean, I shared those concerns. You know, we now see that the smartphones made our kids dumb, arguably, right? And now we think AI is going to make them smart. Like it may be, I mean, it could, if used the right way, right? But I think there's also this great awareness that in many cases we need to make school an AI free zone so that we can develop kids' own cognitive potential. I mean, I heard somebody say the other day that basically, hey, they're going to use this AI in the real world, let them practice it now, and if that, if it gives them some cognitive superpowers, great. I think, wait a minute, is this going to become another excuse for us not to fully develop the academic and intellectual potential of individual kids, right? I mean, that just sounds like you say, like taking us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, look, the act of teaching, the act of learning is very much a human act, right? And so for us, we center with what is the role of the educator and the student being augmented by technology, not replaced by technology. Mm-hmm. Now, I think the opportunities here, if educators are the ones shaping this, if educators are the one making sure that students are still doing the critical thinking, the teamwork, and all the skills that you need to be uniquely human, I think the opportunity here is one in which educators can personalize instruction in ways they couldn't have imagined doing before. I visited a classroom, Simon Elementary in Washington, D.C., where one of our alums was teaching phonics, right? And she has 30 students under third grade and under in the classroom. And as you know, phonics is a very visual exercise and an auditory exercise. You have to understand how a student is sounding out a letter when they're learning how to read. And you can't do that if you're a teacher for 30 students. So she was using this AI tool to just gather data, which students were pronouncing and sounding out which letters effectively, which ones were not. That the tool was then helping to group students based on that data. But she was then leaning in to personalizing her instruction for those students, depending on what they uniquely needed, right? So she was using it as a data capture tool that made her unique role as an educator even more valuable and specific to what that student needed. So I think that's one example of the type of potential that AI can have in the classroom.
Well, Aneesh, so we could talk so much more and for longer, but that is all the time we've got for today. But I really appreciate you coming on the show. Aneesh Sohoni, the newish CEO of Teach for America. Thanks for all you do and for what your core members and alumni are doing out there as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Look, I think we've proven a lot over these last 35 years. And so as we look at the next 35, despite all the challenges, I'm quite hopeful. I'm quite optimistic if we can stay focused on what we know really works for students. And I'm excited to be in that charge alongside both of you.
All right, great. Thanks so much, Aneesh. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Adams Research Minute. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
So we are recording this on Monday. By the time people listen to this, as soon as Wednesday morning, we will all be in Atlanta for the Pi Network Conference. Maybe you are listening to it right now as you are working out in the hotel gym before the conference events start for the day. I'm excited. We've got a big contingent from Fordham going.
I've never been before. What's the main thing to look out for, Mike?
Oh my gosh, this is the best conference on the schedule, in my opinion. Now, I am biased. I had played a role in helping to start the Pi Network, which is now a huge umbrella organization for over 200 ed reform groups at the national, state, and local levels, with a big focus on state, really. I mean, I think the main thing is just to be paying attention to what people who are actually in state capitals trying to make policy change are telling us. And I'll be curious too, especially from the blue states. I have this kind of sense that it's just impossible right now to get much reform done in the blue states because of the unions, because the progressive left is so strong. But I would like to be told that that's not correct. So we'll see. Yeah. All right. Well, with that, why don't we turn our attention to education research? What you got for us this week?
Well, today on the Research Minute, we've got one of our own, a new national study of school board members just released and authored by education research luminaries David Houston and Michael Hartney. And because this is Adam's Research Minute, at least for the time being, I'm going to tell you all what stood out to me. If you want every table and caveat and recommendation that the authors produced, the full report, as always, is available at fordhaminstitute.org, and every listener should go and check it out right now, or at least after they finish listening to me. First, let me tell you about their data, which are impressive. The This is possibly the most ambitious survey of school board members ever conducted. They collected and analyzed responses from more than 5,000 school board members from 3,093 different school districts. And they were able to compare that data with data from a 2001 survey, as well as some national survey data, like the Education Next survey, which Professor Houston helps to administer, that use similar question wording. So they can make some of those comparisons. Now, before we get to the results of the report, we have to talk for a second about school boards and where most of them are located, more specifically, because it matters when you start comparing school board member demographics and opinions to those of regular people. The researchers analyze the results in two ways. The first is called nationally representative, where each board member counts exactly the same, but you have to keep in mind that America has tons of tiny rural school districts. So if an answer is nationally representative of school board members, that means that most of the members are going to come from small rural school districts, and they wouldn't reflect the demographics of the country anyway. The country, of course, is much more urban and suburban. They also use what they call enrollment weighted estimates, which upweights members based on how many students are in their districts. That better approximates the demographics of the country. I also have to note that when they compare school board members' opinions to local opinions, all they have to represent the local perspective is the 2020 presidential vote share. That's a helpful proxy, but it is, of course, just a proxy. Now that is all crystal clear for you, let me talk about what jumped out to me as the most interesting findings in this new report. First, I thought that the levels of Hispanic representation on school boards, or should I say the lack thereof, was truly jaw-dropping. Now remember, around 30% of K-12 students in the country are Hispanic, and the Hispanic share of the population has risen substantially in the last couple of decades. School board members, on the other hand, are no more likely to be Hispanic today than they were back in 2001. And Hispanic representation was still disproportionately low even back then. In 2001, 4% of school board members were Hispanic. In this most recent survey, 4% of school board members were Hispanic. Again, that's wild to me. Also, during this period, the share of board members who are Black has fallen. So while the country has become more diverse, the share of school board members who are white has actually increased, according to this report. The one demographic bright spot is gender. Boards are now roughly half women, half men, whereas men were 60% of board members a generation ago. Second, charter schools. Board members are strikingly more anti-charter than the public. Roughly 6 in 10 board members oppose charter formation. Among the public, support for charters outnumbers opposition. Now, maybe this shouldn't be a huge surprise. We may be picking up some institutional self-interest here. Charters are, of course, enrollment and budget competition in many places, so that might help explain why districts are a little skeptical of charters. Definitely notable, though. Third, compared to the public, school board members seem to see their districts through rose-tinted glasses. When asked to grade their own districts, about 3/4 of school board members hand out an A or a B. Among the public, it's closer to half who say their local district deserves an A or a B. That optimism gap may be at the heart of a lot of local frustration with school districts, and if leaders aren't seeing the problems, they're probably going to feel less urgency to reform. One other point to note, and I will end with this, is that the authors try to compare school board members' views on hot button cultural issues, stuff about transgender policies in schools or teaching about racism, and they aim to compare members' views to those of their constituents. And of course, there's a bunch of caveats on this, as I mentioned earlier, but the authors find that board community alignment is a bit stronger than we might expect on those issues. For example, they saw their largest matches between the public and board members on transgender issues like bathroom access and sports participation. The bigger gaps show up on the kind of more boring institutional stuff, like I was saying, charter policy, views of teacher unions, and how good the local schools are, where boards' instincts often diverge from those of their constituents.
All right. Thank you so much, Adam. And thank you to our partners on this one. It is such a great piece of work. I think you did hit the major findings. God, the Hispanic underrepresentation really is striking. Makes me wonder how we've done on that front on other elected boards. Like I wonder county council, city commissioners, even in state legislatures, Congress. My sense is, for example, in Congress that, it's not like there aren't any Latina representatives in the House, so there, I don't know. It just makes me curious. It seems like it's got to be better than 4%. Like, what is it about school boards? But that would be one thing I'd be curious about. I'm also interested, this idea that the school board members have these rose-colored glasses. They don't like charter schools. They're more amenable to teachers' unions. This all goes together, right? If you believe that teachers' unions are very good at getting people elected to school boards, it's not surprising that school board members might like teachers' unions and oppose charter schools, which teachers' unions also oppose. But I also do wonder if there's people that, decide to run for school board because they want to give back to the community and maybe they have some real concerns with the local district. And then over time, they start to see it a little more from the inside and maybe their views of the school district shift and they start to say, oh, well, actually, I didn't understand that, some of what I didn't like was state policy. Some of what I didn't like was federal policy. Or now I'm feeling like our people are doing a pretty good job now that I know them better. I don't know. It's just, I wonder if there's almost individual level change as a school board member over time. What do you see in here, David, that you think is interesting?
Yeah, I was going to say something pretty similar, right? You can characterize it in any number of ways, right? You can say it's the effect of interest groups. You can say it's just affinity bias, right? The sort of more positive spin on it is that as people become familiar with the challenges that come with running a public school or a school district, that they are less inclined to judge the folks who are doing the work harshly. Honestly, this is one of those things where it kind of depends on what side of the bed I woke up on that morning, right? Traditionally, the reformer stance is that the American people are out to lunch, right, and sort of are not sufficiently critical of their education system, right?
I don't know why we're not more popular when we have those views.
Right. But, I have to say, like in recent years, I have felt like the critique is getting, it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I feel like the pandemic was a disaster, right? But I also feel like the narrative that our public schools are just a total disaster is also a little bit dangerous insofar as it just is leading to this notion that, well, anything, is better than this. And it's not, right? Lots of things could be worse. And so I think my take on that is that if you work in the system, you see a lot of people working hard, right? Mm-hmm. And even Rick Hess has said this, right? He's like, I can't believe how many great people are working in a broken system. Mm-hmm. And I think that is probably how a lot of people feel.
Yeah. I think the other thing that that Michael and David would want us to say is that, of course, there's a lot of people out there who point to school boards as this paragon of local democratic control, right? And the flip side is saying that things like charter schools or school choice, are anti-democratic because they don't have these school board people involved. There's a grain of truth to that, right? But then when you dig in and you see that, well, for some reason, these school board members aren't all that representative in some important ways. Guess what? They get elected in these off-year elections when very few people vote. Some studies showing that almost all the people who do vote are members of the teachers' unions or their families. That we should take a little bit of a grain of salt these claims that public schools are, run democratically. It is not a perfectly representative institution. You feel okay about that, Adam?
Totally. I mean, I think that's a point that Vlad Kogan makes in his new book that just came out. And I mean, talking about, I don't know about the teacher union capture argument, I think maybe is a little overstated, but it's true that most of the people voting in the school board elections, they don't have kids. They don't have, it's really disconnected from the real problems on the ground. And so it shouldn't be a huge surprise that the people serving on the school boards, the democratic mechanisms aren't really working real well to make sure that those people are reflecting the real concerns of parents and students.
All right. We will have to leave it there. Thank you, Adam and David. Thank you as well. That is all the time we've got for this week. So until next week,
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.